My in-laws humiliated me until the secret truth shook everyone. The unseen servant. There's a specific kind of pain that doesn't make a sound. It isn't like breaking a bone or cutting your skin. It's the slow, heavy ache of standing in a room full of people who treat you like you're invisible, or worse, like you are beneath the floorboards they walk on. My name is Maya. For 5 years, I lived in a house that was built on old money, big titles, and suffocating arrogance. My husband, Julian, came from the prestigious Vance family. His father, Arthur Vance, was a retired senior judge whose name carried weight in every legal circle in the city. His mother, Beatrice, was a prominent socialite who measured a person's worth entirely by their last name, their bank balance, and the brand of watch on their wrist. And then there was me. I met Julian when we were both 24. At the time, I was working as a junior archivist at a historic preservation foundation. I didn't come from money. My father had been a quiet high school history teacher who passed away when I was 19, leaving my mother and me with a small, comfortable home and a mountain of fond memories, but no corporate empire or family trust. When Julian proposed, he promised me that his family's wealth didn't matter to him. Maya, you have a purity and strength that none of the shallow people in my world possess, he used to whisper, looking into my eyes. My family will come around once they see how much you mean to me. I was young, in love, and desperate to believe him. But love doesn't shield you from the cold reality of a hostile household. When we married, Beatrice made sure I knew my place from day one. Instead of welcoming me as a daughter-in-law, she treated me like an unwelcome charity case. At family dinners in their sprawling glass and stone mansion in the hills, she would intentionally host grand gatherings with diplomats, corporate directors, and wealthy heiresses, leaving me sitting at the far end of the long dining table. She would pass comments with a quiet, polite venom that was disguised as concern. "Maya, dear," Beatrice would say across the table, her diamond bracelets clicking as she set down her wine glass. "Do try the smoked salmon. I know your family probably couldn't afford imported seafood growing up, but you really must train your palate now that you carry the Vance name." The guests would chuckle softly under their breath. Julian would clear his throat, glance at his mother, and then lean over to whisper to me, "Just ignore her, Maya. You know how she is. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." That was Julian's favorite phrase. Whenever his mother humiliated me, whenever his younger sister, Clara, made snide remarks about my modest wardrobe, or whenever his father ordered me around like an unpaid housekeeper during their weekend dinner parties, Julian's response was always the same. Stay quiet. Don't make a scene. For 5 years, I followed his advice. I swallowed my pride. I cooked their elaborate holiday meals, organized their catering events, cleaned up after their lavish parties, and smiled through every cruel joke aimed at my background. I tolerated it because I believed I was making a sacrifice for my marriage. I believed that my patience would eventually earn their respect. I didn't realize that in the eyes of bullies, patience isn't respected. It is seen as weakness. And weakness is an invitation to crush you completely. The real shift began 6 months ago when Julian's father, Arthur, announced his intention to expand the family's real estate development firm into a massive $50 million historical district renovation project funded by state grants and private international investors. The project required securing the development rights to the old Kingsbury Estate, a vast, historic 60-acre property on the edge of a city that had been tied up in complex legal trusts and disputed historical deeds for nearly half a century. Arthur was obsessed with securing the Kingsbury deal. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of his legacy, guaranteeing the Vance family's wealth for generations. During this time, Julian's behavior toward me began to change rapidly. He started coming home late, smelling of expensive foreign perfumes that I didn't own. He stopped holding my hand. When I tried to talk to him about his day, he would look at his phone with an irritated sigh. "Maya, I'm stressed, okay?" he snapped one evening when I asked why he had missed our 5th anniversary dinner. "My father is pushing me to close the Kingsbury acquisition, and I don't have time to sit around playing house with you. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under anyway. You've never managed anything larger than a library catalog." I stood in our quiet kitchen, holding the small homemade cake I had baked for our anniversary. The word stung, but what hurt more was the cold, distant look in his eyes. The man who had once sworn that my background didn't matter was now looking at me through his mother's eyes. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Saturday evening in early October. The Vance family was hosting an exclusive, high-profile cocktail gala at their mansion to celebrate the preliminary launch of the Kingsbury project. Over 200 influential guests were invited: city council members, billionaire investors, media executives, and elite lawyers. Beatrice had spent the entire week barking orders at me. She had me supervising the floral arrangements, checking the wine inventories, and directing the catering staff for 6 hours straight before the event even began. By 8 o'clock in the evening, I was exhausted, my feet ached, and my plain dark dress was dusted with flower pollen. As the guests filed into the grand ballroom, I stood near the catering staff entrance, holding a tray of champagne flutes, making sure the servers were filling glasses properly. That was when I heard Beatrice's shrill, booming laugh from the center of the room. She was standing near the grand marble fireplace, surrounded by a group of wealthy socialites, including Victoria Sterling, the elegant 26-year-old daughter of the city's largest banking tycoon. Victoria was holding Julian's arm, laughing softly as she leaned into his shoulder. Julian wasn't pulling away. He was smiling down at her with a look of warm, attentive admiration, a look he hadn't given me in years. "Oh, Victoria, you have no idea how delighted we are to have your family involved in the project," Beatrice said loudly, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Julian has been working so hard, and having a brilliant, cultured woman like you by his side at these events makes all the difference." One of the socialites in the circle glanced toward the catering entrance, spotting me. "Beatrice, isn't that Julian's wife standing over there with the serving staff?" Beatrice didn't even turn around to look at me. She simply waved her hand dismissively, as if brushing away a stray fly. "Oh, please, let's not talk about domestic mistakes," Beatrice laughed loudly, making sure her voice reached the surrounding guests. "Maya's more of a house manager than a wife, really. She's useful for organizing the kitchen staff, but she lacks the pedigree, the intellect, and the family name to ever represent the Vance empire. Julian knows he outgrew that temporary arrangement a long time ago." The small group laughed politely. Julian stood right next to his mother, sipping his champagne, and said absolutely nothing to defend me. He didn't correct her. He didn't walk over to me. He simply smiled, took another sip of his drink, and placed his hand gently over Victoria Sterling's hand on his arm. I stood completely still in the dim hallway near the service kitchen, holding the tray of champagne. The loud noise of the party, the clinking glasses, the classical violin music, the superficial laughter, faded into a dull, distant buzz. 5 years of my life. 5 years of washing their dishes, enduring their insults, supporting Julian through his anxieties, and putting up with their vicious snobbery. To them, I was just a domestic mistake, a temporary placeholder until Julian found a wealthy heiress like Victoria to complete his family's social profile. They thought I was just a helpless, quiet girl with no family, no fortune, and no power to fight back. They had no idea that the simple archivist they treated like a servant held the one piece of paper that was about to turn their entire world into dust. Here is Chapter 2 of your full-length, cinematic, voiceover-ready script. Performing arts script. My in-laws humiliated me until the secret truth shook everyone. Target pace, dramatic, slow burn, emotional storytelling, 120 to 130 words per minute. POV, first-person narration, female protagonist, Maya. Chapter 2, The Kingsbury Legacy. Estimated duration, 12 minutes. Word count, 400 words. When you spend 5 years being treated like dirt, people assume you have nowhere else to go. They assume your silence is built on weakness, fear, and dependency. What the Vance family never took the time to learn about me was the very reason I became a historical archivist in the first place. My father was not just a quiet high school history teacher. Before he passed away, he was the city's foremost scholar on land deeds, colonial trusts, and early century historical estates. He possessed a brilliant, meticulous mind for uncovering forgotten legal chains of ownership, a passion he passed down to me from the time I was 10 years old. When my father died 7 years ago, he left my mother and me a small wooden chest filled with old journals, original land survey maps, and sealed wax documents. One specific file inside that chest had sat quietly in my home office safe for years, the original 1924 Kingsbury Land Trust Covenant. The Vance family had spent the last 2 years desperately trying to acquire the historic 60-acre Kingsbury Estate for their $50 million renovation project. Arthur Vance's lawyers had been dealing with a shell foundation that claimed to manage the property's ancestral trust. What Arthur Vance's expensive corporate legal team had failed to catch, or perhaps chose to ignore in their rush to steal the land, was a critical, hidden legal clause in the original deed. The Kingsbury Estate had not been sold to a corporate foundation in 1970. It had been placed into an irrevocable, bloodline-restricted historical conservatorship created by its original founder, Lord Thomas Kingsbury. And Lord Thomas Kingsbury's direct maternal great-granddaughter was my late father's mother, my grandmother, which meant that I was not just a broke, working-class girl with no pedigree, as Beatrice Vance liked to whisper to her wealthy friends. I was the sole surviving legal heir to the entire 60-acre Kingsbury Estate. The very property that Arthur Vance was relying on to save his empire, the very land he had already pledged to international investors as collateral for his multi-million-dollar loans, didn't belong to the city, the state, or his shell foundation. It belonged entirely to me. I had kept this secret for 5 years, not because I wanted to trick anyone, but because I had genuinely loved Julian. When I married him, I wanted our life to be built on real connection, hard work, and mutual trust. I didn't want his family's suffocating greed to taint my family's heritage. I was waiting for the right moment, the right season of stability, to share it with him. Standing in the dim service hallway of the Vance mansion that rainy evening, watching Julian hold Victoria Sterling's hand while his mother publicly ridiculed my existence, I realized that season would never come. Julian had not just failed to defend me, he had actively thrown me to the wolves to secure his family's position in high society. I set the serving tray down on the kitchen counter, took off my apron, walked quietly out the side entrance into the pouring rain, and got into my modest sedan. I didn't cry on the drive home. The time for tears had passed. The next morning, while Julian was out playing golf with Victoria's father, I took the sealed wooden chest from my home safe and drove straight downtown to the glass and steel tower of Blackwood and Associates, the city's premier firm specializing in high-stakes land dispute litigation and corporate fraud. I had booked an urgent consultation with Evelyn Blackwood, a sharp, formidable senior partner known throughout the state for dismantling corporate land grabs. I sat in Evelyn's soundproof corner office on the 35th floor. I laid out the dusty 1924 parchment documents, the verified genealogy certificates, and the official land registry surveys across her glass desk. Evelyn put on her gold-rimmed reading glasses and examined the documents in complete silence for nearly 20 minutes. She checked the wax seals, cross-referenced the state archives on her monitor, and traced the lineage papers with a quiet, focused intensity. Finally, she leaned back in her high-back leather chair, pulled off her glasses, and looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. "Mrs. Vance," Evelyn began, her voice low and measured. "Do you have any idea what you are holding in your hands?" "I know it's the original Kingsbury Covenant, Miss Blackwood," I said calmly. "I know my father spent 15 years verifying its legal authenticity before he passed." "It's more than just an authentic document," Evelyn said, tapping the paper. "Your husband's family firm, Vance Development Corp., filed preliminary public bonds last week claiming they had acquired clear title to the Kingsbury Estate from a secondary holding company called Beacon Holdings." "I know," I replied. "Arthur Vance announced it at his gala last night." Evelyn chuckled, a short, cold laugh. "Then Arthur Vance has committed catastrophic legal fraud. Beacon Holdings is an unauthorized offshore entity that forged preliminary transfer papers 5 years ago. They never had the legal right to sell or transfer a single square foot of that land. The original covenant explicitly dictates that ownership can only be passed through direct bloodline consent or held in public conservatorship." Evelyn leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk, her eyes sharp as a hawk. "Without your personal signature, Mrs. Vance, the entire $50 million Kingsbury development project is illegal. Every contract Arthur Vance signed with his investors, every loan he pulled from the Sterling banking group, and every building permit he secured is completely worthless." I looked at the window overlooking the city skyline, watching the rain streak down the glass. "What happens if I exercise my legal rights right now?" I asked softly. "If we file a formal title injunction today," Evelyn explained, The court will freeze the entire project instantly. But, Evelyn paused, a ruthless, strategic smile forming on her lips. If we wait 2 weeks, until Arthur Vance hosts his official groundbreaking ceremony in front of the mayor, the state governor, and his primary financial backers, the damage won't just be financial. Evelyn tapped her pen on the desk. It will completely dismantle the Vance family empire overnight. They will be forced to repay $50 million in defaulted investor funds immediately, face federal fraud investigations, and lose every ounce of social standing they have ever claimed. I sat in the quiet office, feeling the heavy burden of 5 years of humiliation slowly lifting off my shoulders. They had treated me like a nobody. They had called me a domestic mistake. They had used my quiet nature to walk all over my dignity, assuming I would simply disappear when they were finished with me. They were about to learn that the woman they tried to push into the dark was the one holding the torch. "Miss Blackwood," I said, looking her straight in the eyes, my voice steady and cold as ice. "Prepare the injunction. We wait for the groundbreaking ceremony. When you are preparing to pull the rug out from under people who believe they are untouchable, you must become invisible. You must let them believe they have won." For the next 12 days, I played my part with absolute perfection. Every morning, I woke up early, made Julian's dark roast coffee, pressed his shirts, and handed him his briefcase with a quiet, submissive smile. When Beatrice called to demand that I organize the catering invoices for the upcoming groundbreaking gala, I answered with a polite, obedient tone. "Of course, Beatrice. I'll handle it immediately." They mistook my complete composure for broken spirit. To Beatrice and Arthur, my quiet demeanor meant that I had accepted my place as the discarded servant. They thought I was too broken to fight back, too uneducated to understand what was happening around me, and too poor to hire legal help. Arrogance makes people profoundly blind. One evening, 4 days before the ceremony, Julian came home late. He walked into our bedroom, tossed his leather jacket onto the chair, and sat on the edge of the bed without looking at me. I was sitting at my vanity, brushing my hair. "Maya," Julian began, his voice flat, emotionless, and detached. "We need to talk." I set the hairbrush down slowly, watching his reflection in the mirror. "What is it, Julian?" He pulled a thin white envelope from his coat pocket and set it on the nightstand between us. "I think it's best if we go our separate ways," he said, speaking as if he were reading a business memo. "My family is entering a new chapter with the Kingsbury project. My role in the company is expanding, and frankly, our lives are moving in completely different directions." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply turned around on my stool to face him. "Different directions?" I asked softly. "Does those directions include Victoria Sterling, Julian?" Julian's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He shrugged his shoulders with cold indifference. "Victoria understands the demands of my world, Maya," he said, looking past me at the wall. "Her family is backing our development loans. She fits into the future my parents have built for me. You were part of my past. I'll make sure you get a reasonable financial settlement, maybe $50,000, if you sign the uncontested separation papers quietly before the end of the week." $50,000. 5 years of my youth, 5 years of emotional abuse from his mother, and 5 years of holding his personal life together while he built his career. He was offering me a pocket change bribe to clear his path so he could marry the tycoon's daughter. And if I refused to sign before the groundbreaking ceremony? I asked, keeping my voice entirely neutral. Julian let out a bitter, mocking laugh. He stood up, towering over me, looking down at me with the same cold contempt his mother had refined over decades. "Refuse?" Julian sneered. "With what money, Maya? What lawyers are you going to hire? My father sits on the advisory board of the State Judicial Committee. My mother controls half the social foundations in the city. If you try to make this ugly, my family's legal team will tie you up in court until you don't have a single penny left to your name. Sign the papers, take the 50 grand, and walk away gracefully." I looked up at my husband, the man I had once loved so deeply that I would have given my life for him, and realized that there was nothing left of the man I married. He had completely swallowed his family's poison. "I understand, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll make my decision by the day of the groundbreaking ceremony." "Good," Julian smirked, picking up his car keys. "Smart girl." I'm staying at the downtown hotel tonight. Don't wait up. He walked out, slamming the bedroom door behind him. The moment his car roared down the driveway, I pulled out my phone and dialed Evelyn Blackwood. Evelyn, I said into the receiver, my hand steady. He just handed me separation papers. Perfect, Evelyn replied from her office, the sound of legal papers shuffling in the background. That establishes clear intent of marital abandonment right before the commercial asset realization. The judge is going to love this. Is everything ready for Thursday morning? The state survey teams have completed the private title audit, I confirmed. The injunction is signed by the chief administrative judge. What time do we move? Arthur Vance's groundbreaking presentation starts at 10 a.m. at the Kingsbury Estate main gates, Evelyn said, her voice filled with sharp, professional excitement. The mayor, the governor, the city council, and the entire Sterling Banking Executive Board will be sitting in the front row. We deliver the court order at 10:15 a.m., right after Arthur finishes his opening speech. I'll be there, Evelyn, I said, wearing my best dress. That night, I didn't sleep out of anxiety. I slept out of peaceful anticipation. The Vance family had spent 5 years treating me like an uninvited guest in their grand life. They had laughed at my background, insulted my late father's memory, and plotted to throw me out like garbage the second they tasted real power. They thought Thursday morning was going to be the crowning moment of the Vance family dynasty. They had no idea it was going to be the day the entire world watched them fall to their knees. Here is Chapter 4 of your full-length, cinematic, voiceover-ready script. Performing arts script. My in-laws humiliated me until the secret truth shook everyone. Target pace. Dramatic. High stakes. Cinematic storytelling, 120 to 130 words per minute. POV. First-person narration. Female protagonist, Maya. Chapter 4. The groundbreaking disaster. Estimated duration. 12 minutes word count. 400 words. Thursday morning arrived under a crisp, clear sky. The historic main entrance of the Kingsbury Estate was transformed into an extravagant event venue. A massive white marquee, tent stood against the backdrop of the rolling green hills and the ancient oak trees. Over 300 high-profile guests had gathered. Valet drivers lined up luxury cars. Champagne flutes glistened on silver trays, and a brass band played softly near the entrance. Broadcast trucks from 3 major regional news networks were parked along the driveway, their satellite dishes pointed skyward to broadcast the event live across the state. In the front row under the marquee sat the city's power brokers, the mayor, 2 state senators, the district attorney, and the executive board of the Sterling Banking Group, led by Victoria's father, Richard Sterling. Standing near the podium, looking like royalty, was the Vance family. Arthur Vance was wearing an impeccable navy bespoke suit, holding a silver-plated shovel tied with a red ribbon. Beside him stood Beatrice, decked out in an ivory trench coat and a diamond necklace, holding court with the governor's wife. Julian stood right next to them, smiling broadly for the press photographers, his arm wrapped firmly around Victoria Sterling. They were glowing with the arrogance of people who believe they owned the world. At 10 a.m. sharp, Arthur Vance stepped up to the crystal podium. The crowd applauded enthusiastically as the news cameras zoomed in on his face. Distinguished guests, leaders of our great city, and honored partners, Arthur began, his voice deep, smooth, and commanding. Today marks the dawn of a new era for our community. For 50 years, this magnificent 60-acre Kingsbury property sat dormant, a forgotten jewel in our city's crown. But today, through vision, hard work, and relentless perseverance, Vance Development Corp is proud to officially claim this land for our historic $50 million revival project. The crowd broke into wild applause. Beatrice dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, looking proudly at her husband. Julian gave Victoria a quick, triumphant kiss on the cheek. This project, Arthur continued, leaning into the microphone, represents the strength of legacy. It proves that when you possess the pedigree, the vision, and the right leadership, no obstacle can stand in your way. Today, we officially break ground. Arthur raised his right hand, signaling for the ceremonial ribbon cutting. Right as his fingers touched the silver ribbon, a sleek black town car pulled directly up to the edge of the red carpet, stopping right in front of the main stage. The car doors opened. Stepping out from the passenger side was Evelyn Blackwood, carrying a leather briefcase. And right behind her, stepping into the glaring sunlight, was me. I was wearing a tailored charcoal gray suit, my hair pinned up in an elegant bun, holding a red-stamped legal folder. Walking alongside us were two uniformed state marshals and the chief land registrar for the district court. A sudden hush fell over the crowd. The brass band stopped playing. Camera operators instinctively turned their heavy lenses away from Arthur Vance and pointed them straight at us as we walked down the center aisle. Beatrice's jaw dropped. She stared at me as if she had seen a ghost. Julian's face went dead white. He took a hasty step back from Victoria, staring at me in absolute disbelief. "Maya!" Julian blurted out, his voice picked up by the microphone on the podium. What? What are you doing here?" "I told you to stay at home." Arthur Vance glared at me from behind the podium, his face turning a deep, furious shade of red. He slammed his hand on the wood, shouting into the microphone. "Security! Remove these people immediately!" Arthur demanded. "This is a private corporate event." Before the private security guards could take a single step, the two state marshals stepped forward, displaying their official federal badges. "Stand down," the lead marshal ordered firmly. "This court order is issued by the chief administrative judge of the state superior court. Anyone interfering with the execution of this writ will be placed under immediate arrest for obstruction of justice." The security guards froze, backing away instantly. Evelyn Blackwood stepped onto the raised wooden stage, pulling a heavy, red-sealed document from her briefcase and handed it directly to the chief registrar, who stepped up to the podium microphone. "Under Judicial Order 44B, the chief registrar announced, his voice echoing loudly across the speakers and straight into the live broadcast feeds. All development activities, financial transactions, and land claims associated with the Kingsbury Estate are hereby immediately frozen. A sharp, collective gasp rippled through the 300 guests. Reporters began shouting questions as camera shutters clicked frantically. "What is the meaning of this madness?" Arthur Vance roared, his face shaking with rage as he grabbed the edge of the podium. "My company holds a valid commercial deed from Beacon Holdings. We have invested $20 million of private capital into this property." Evelyn Blackwood took a step forward, looking Arthur Vance straight in the eyes with cold, professional authority. "Mr. Vance, Beacon Holdings was a fraudulent shell corporation that forged preliminary transfer papers 5 years ago," Evelyn stated, clearly for the cameras. "They never possessed legal title to this land. The original 1924 Kingsbury Covenant explicitly restricts all property transfers strictly through maternal bloodline succession." Evelyn turned toward me, extending her hand. "The sole surviving legal owner, sole title holder, and sole managing conservator of the entire 60-acre Kingsbury Estate is Mrs. Maya Vance." The entire marquee erupted into chaos. Richard Sterling, Victoria's billionaire banker father, instantly stood up from his front row seat, his eyes wide with horror as he realized the $20 million credit line his bank had just issued was backed by a fraudulent title. "Arthur!" Richard Sterling shouted, pointing a finger at Arthur Vance. "What did you do? Did you secure our bank loans using forged land deeds?" "No. Richard, listen to me. It's a mistake. She's my daughter-in-law. She's nobody." Arthur stammered, his polished composure completely shattering live on camera. Julian rushed to the front of the stage, sweating profusely, looking down at me with frantic, desperate eyes. "Maya, please!" Julian cried out, his voice cracking into a pathetic sob. "What are you doing to my family? We're married. We can talk about this. Whatever you want, we can fix it." I took a slow, deliberate step forward until I stood at the base of the podium, looking up at the man who had handed me separation papers 3 nights ago. I pulled the white envelope he had given me out of my pocket and held it up for the cameras to see. "3 days ago, Julian," I said, my voice clear, quiet, and perfectly captured by the news microphones. "You offered me $50,000 to walk away quietly because your family thought I lacked the pedigree to be in your world." I let the envelope fall from my hand onto the red carpet at his feet. "You tried to push me into the dark, Julian," I said softly, looking past him at Beatrice, whose face was completely pale as she leaned against the podium for support. "Now, you can watch your empire collapse in the light." The lead marshal stepped onto the stage, producing a formal legal summons. "Arthur Vance, Julian Vance, the marshal declared. You are hereby served with an emergency court injunction for commercial title fraud, misrepresentation of assets, and defraudment of institutional lenders. Clear the stage immediately. The massive silver-plated shovel slipped from Arthur's trembling hands, clattering loudly against the wooden floorboards. The man who had stood there 10 minutes ago claiming to own the city was now being escorted off his own stage by federal marshals in front of the governor, his biggest investors, and national news cameras. I turned around slowly, picked up my briefcase, and walked back down the center aisle through the sea of flashing cameras, not as the quiet, forgotten daughter-in-law, but as the rightful owner of everything they had tried to steal. Here is Chapter 5 of your full-length, cinematic, voiceover-ready script. Performing arts script. My in-laws humiliated me until the secret truth shook everyone. Target pace. Dramatic, high-tension, emotional storytelling, 120 to 130 words per minute. POV. First-person narration. Female protagonist, Maya. Chapter 5. The Collapse of an Empire. Estimated duration. 12 minutes word count. 400 words. When a house of cards falls, it doesn't just tumble. It shatters into tiny, unrecoverable pieces. The footage of Arthur Vance dropping his ceremonial shovel, Julian weeping on stage, and Beatrice covering her face from news cameras went viral within hours. Local news channels ran the footage on a loop under the headline, "The $50 million land fraud, the Vance dynasty exposed." For the Vance family, the fallout was immediate, brutal, and unforgiving. Within 24 hours of the injunction, Richard Sterling, the banking tycoon whose money was supposed to fund the Kingsbury project, called an emergency meeting of his executive board. The bank officially declared Arthur Vance's corporate loans in default, seizing every corporate asset Vance Development Corp. Owned to cover the multi-million-dollar loss. When the bank came knocking, Arthur had no defense. He had lied on institutional lending applications, claiming he held clear title to land he never owned. The district attorney launched a formal grand jury investigation into commercial asset fraud and forgery. Then came the personal betrayals, the very kind the Vances were so fond of inflicting on others. Victoria Sterling didn't stick around to offer comfort or support. The moment the news broke that Julian's family was facing financial ruin and potential prison time, Victoria deleted Julian's number, blocked his social media accounts, and flew out to Europe on her father's private jet. She had never loved Julian. She had only loved the power and prestige his family's project promised. Julian was left completely alone in the wreckage of his own arrogance. 3 weeks after the groundbreaking disaster, the final civil settlement hearing took place in the county court. The contrast in the courtroom was striking. On one side sat Evelyn Blackwood and me, calm, composed, and supported by a mountain of authenticated historical deeds and land registry audits. On the other side sat Arthur, Beatrice, and Julian, accompanied by a weary corporate lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The Vance family looked completely destroyed. Arthur's sharp navy suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled blazer. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed by stress. Beatrice, who had spent 5 years mocking my clothing and my background, sat in the corner of the courtroom wearing no jewelry, staring blankly at her hands. And Julian looked like a shell of the man I had married. He had lost weight, his hair was unkempt, and he couldn't even summon the courage to raise his eyes to look at me. The presiding judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, reviewed the final audit report before addressing the room. In all my years on the bench, the judge began, her voice ringing clearly through the quiet courtroom, I have rarely seen such a reckless display of corporate hubris. Mr. Arthur Vance, you attempted to usurp a 99-year-old historical covenant, deceive international lenders, and bulldoze over a legitimate heir's rights simply because you believed your name placed you above the law. The judge picked up her pen, signing the official decree. The court hereby confirms Mrs. Maya Vance as the sole, undisputed owner of the Kingsbury Estate. Furthermore, to satisfy the civil damages caused by Vance Development's illegal trespass and fraudulent land claims, the court orders the immediate liquidation of Vance Development's secondary assets, with full financial restitution awarded to the legal owner. With a single strike of the gavel, it was over. The Vance family didn't just lose the Kingsbury project. They lost their corporate firm, their prestige, and their family fortune. The mansion in the hills was put up for public auction to settle their bank debts. The family that had judged everyone by their bank balances was now facing total, humiliating bankruptcy. As the court adjourned and the lawyers began packing their files, Julian slowly pushed his chair back and shuffled across the wooden floor toward me. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking, raw with desperation. "Please, just give me 5 minutes. That's all I ask." I looked at him, feeling no anger, no hatred, and no urge to gloat. I only felt a deep, peaceful quiet. "What is there left to say, Julian?" I asked softly. "I made a mistake, Maya," Julian sobbed, tears welling in his eyes as he reached out a trembling hand. "My parents pushed me. They made me believe that money and status were everything. I was stupid. I was blind. I threw away the only genuine person who ever loved me for people who abandoned me the second things went wrong." He dropped to his knees right there in the empty courtroom floor, looking up at me with desperate, bloodshot eyes. "Please, Maya, take me back. We can sell the land, leave the city, and start over somewhere quiet, just like we used to be." I looked down at the man who had sat by silently while his mother called me a domestic mistake. The man who had handed me an envelope with $50,000 and told me I didn't fit into his future. "You can't go back, Julian," I said, my voice steady, calm, and clear. "You didn't make a mistake. You showed me who you truly were when you thought I had nothing. And now, you have to live with the choices you made when you thought you were untouchable." I turned slowly, took my briefcase from the table, and walked out of the courtroom, leaving Julian kneeling alone on the cold floor of the courthouse. When the noise of conflict dies down and the legal battles are won, you are left with the quiet reality of your own life. The months following the trial passed with a surreal, peaceful velocity. With full, undisputed ownership of the Kingsbury Estate secured, I was approached by dozens of high-profile commercial developers offering millions of dollars to build luxury resorts, shopping malls, and high-rise apartments on the 60-acre land. I turned every single one of them down. Money had brought nothing but corruption, arrogance, and destruction to the Vance family. I had no desire to let that same greed pollute my family's legacy. Instead, I collaborated with the city's historical board and local environmental groups to establish the Kingsbury Historical Preservation and Nature Sanctuary. We preserved the historic architecture, restored the sprawling gardens, and opened the grounds to the public as a free community park, educational library, and museum. My father's lifelong dream, to protect the history of our city for future generations, was finally realized. I took up an office in the newly restored main manor on the estate, serving as the chief director of the foundation, living comfortably, quietly, and completely on my own terms. As for the Vance family, their fall from grace was absolute. Arthur Vance received a suspended sentence and heavy financial penalties that completely wiped out his personal savings. He was forced to sell the family's grand mansion at a bank auction to satisfy his defaulted investor debts. The proud judge who once looked down on everyone was forced to retire in shame, his reputation in legal circles completely ruined. Beatrice, unable to bear the social humiliation of losing her status, moved out of the city to live in a modest apartment in a small coastal town, completely cut off from the high society circles that had once been her entire identity. And Julian was hit hardest by the reality of his own choices. Without his family's money or company position, he had to build a life from scratch. He ended up taking a low-level administrative desk job at a small logistics firm across town, earning a modest hourly wage. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after the groundbreaking disaster, I was walking along the stone pathways of the Kingsbury Sanctuary, holding a cup of warm coffee, inspecting the newly planted oak trees near the main entrance gates. A transit bus pulled up to the public stop across the road. Stepping off the bus, holding a worn briefcase and wearing a plain, slightly frayed trench coat, was Julian. He had come to the sanctuary park on his lunch break. He didn't see me at first. He walked over to the wooden bench near the memorial fountain, the very spot where his father had tried to cut the ceremonial ribbon a year prior, and sat down with a paper bag containing a simple sandwich. He looked around at the families laughing on the green lawns, the children feeding ducks near the pond, and the brass plaque at the entrance that read, "Donated to the city by Maya Kingsbury Vance in honor of her father." As he looked at that plaque, a tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it quickly with his sleeve, taking a small bite of his lunch, looking completely lost in the shadow of the life he could have had. I stood under the golden canopy of the autumn trees, watching him from a distance. I felt no urge to walk over to him. I felt no urge to gloat or remind him of his failures. The anger that had once burned in my heart was entirely gone, replaced by a deep, quiet pity. I took a sip of my coffee, adjusted my coat against the cool breeze, turned back toward the manor, and walked into the warm sunlight of my new life. Glowing star moral reflection, voiceover conclusion. In this life, people often mistake patience for weakness. They assume that if you do not fight back immediately, if you remain quiet while they insult your dignity, you are powerless. They forget that a storm does not announce itself with thunder alone. It gathers quietly in the sky long before the rain begins to fall. The Vance family built their entire existence on superficial pride, wealth, and the cruel habit of looking down on others. They thought that pedigree and money gave them the right to walk over people. But in their desperate rush to climb higher, they built their palace on a foundation of lies, and lost everything when the truth finally stood up. To anyone listening to this story who is currently standing in a dark season, enduring the arrogance or betrayal of people who think you are beneath them, do not bow your head. Do not let their bitterness corrupt your soul or drive you to blind rage. Keep your integrity clean. Protect your truth. Stand firm in who you are. Because when the truth finally comes to light, you won't need to lift a finger. Justice has a way of balancing every account, down to the very last cent.